Welcome to the On the Edge podcast with your host, Scott Groves. Hey guys and gals, this is Scott Groves with the On the Edge podcast. I am interviewing a new friend of mine, Trey Kauffman, who is the host of the wildly popular the Mosaic Life podcast. And this is going to be a little bit of a departure from my normal complaining political rants, going hard in the paint with everything that's wrong. Because Trey is on this journey with his friends, with his business, with his podcast to explore like this idea of happiness and what makes people happy. And he's having some great conversations. He's a couple hundred episodes in his podcast. For any of you that know anything about podcasts, most of them fail before episode 17. So just the fact that he's still around and crushing it and talking about happiness, I was like, I need a little bit more happiness in my life. This is the guy who I need to be talking to. So, Trey, what did I miss in the 60-second Reader's Digest version? And what is the key to life and the secret to happiness? Let's just get it out of the way in 5 minutes
and get out of the way.
Fix all the problems of the world in the first 5 minutes of the podcast. So what did I miss in the Reader's Digest version of your biography?
Nah, man, you gave me all the tinglies. That was a very well said introduction. I appreciate that. It's been a really cool journey, and I mean to disappoint you early on, I don't have the secret to happiness, man. I have the secret to my happiness, but it's something that I realized early on in this journey is that it's different for every single person. And when I realized that, it was just kind of an eye-opening moment for me. And so I wanted to kind of unlock the algorithm for happiness, which sounds so out there now that I'm saying it out loud. But for me, I've had to realize what is actually important to me. And more, as important as that, I have to realize what's not important to me and be able to let those things go. So it's been a learning experience, even though, as you know, growing a podcast is extremely difficult and frustrating at times. I get so much value out of actually having these conversations because they help me grow personally.
Yeah, it's so funny. I was looking at some of the comments because we put a little bit of ad money on YouTube and put out one of our videos, which now has a lot of views because of ad money, of course. And somebody commented on it. He's like, your other videos only have 50 views. Why are you still doing this? And I just simply wrote back, I'm like, because this is really for me, not for you. Like we're putting it out there, but my goal is just to talk to interesting people, have a cigar. And, I feel blessed in our business that I can afford a couple $1,000s or a lot of $1,000s worth of equipment to put it out on YouTube. And it's like, I would do it if there were no views because it's for me, not you. And if you get some value out of it, that's awesome.
Absolutely. I feel you when you see that. It can be so disheartening. I put a very few dollars on Facebook just recently just to see what traction I can get putting some money behind the podcast and advertising. I got a notification the other day that somebody had said, "Hi, do you mind if I cuss on your podcast?"
You can cuss all the time, no problem.
Okay. Somebody said, "How do I get this shit off of my newsfeed?" And like me a year and a half, 2 years ago, I would have been crushed like that. Even though they've never listened or even know nothing about me, they just that would have felt so bad for me in the past. But now I don't know. It's not like I pity them. I want people to experience joy and happiness in this life. And if you're going to be upset about the smallest thing on Facebook of all places, then I don't know. I have nothing to say to you. And so I just deleted the comment and moved on with my day.
Yeah, I mean, that's the way to do it. It is getting harder and harder, though, I think, to protect your mental psyche because the tweets, the bleeps, the comments, the Instagram, it is very hard to protect our sanity against negativity. And God forbid you're wading into the social atmosphere anywhere with your podcast. And like you said, advertising some dollars on Facebook, like you're bound to just get shellacked across the face over and over and over again. So, I want to go back to something you said, like you're trying to find the secret to your happiness. And when you started this journey, what started the journey? Why did Trey decide like I've got to put some overwhelming energy to finding my happiness?
Man, I feel like so much of it happened at once, but still at the same time, it was it was in the making for years prior. I mean, when I really decided to start this podcast, I was drinking too much, making some probably bad decisions. And I had another podcast that was coming to an end. It was a comedy podcast with a friend of mine. And my buddy Ernie and I, we always got together. We always every time we were together, even though we weren't the best people in the world, we always challenged ourselves to do the best we could, at least when we're around each other, to sound as noble and high and mighty as we possibly can. And so I invited him onto the podcast, and we hit it off, started bringing people in to interview, and it was just a really, really cool experience. And so again, when I say a couple of things happened at once, actually 2 years ago, this coming Monday, the October 18th, I decided to quit drinking. And so between the podcast and between quitting drinking, those two things just had such a profound and monumental impact on my life. I started to realize through these conversations and through having so much extra time and money and health, I realized what I was capable of. I realized what I'd been limiting myself to over the past, 15 years. And I don't want to bastardize drinking, because a lot of people get value out of that, but I always overdid it. I wasn't an alcoholic, but I was abusing alcohol. And so when I removed that influence from my life, I started to accomplish so much, and it was just a snowball effect from that point forward. And I know you referred me to Jesse Harless, and we had a wonderful conversation. He himself, he is sober because he was court mandated to go to AA, and he had a very different story. But actually hearing, some of his experiences, it just reconfirms, all of the decisions I've made, knowing that I was able to get out of a life prior to making a major mistake. And I don't know, it's just been a really good 2 years for me because of that.
Yeah, it's interesting because, I know Jesse really well, and he and I have had a lot of conversations. And then I've got a few friends in Los Angeles who are very big in the AA community. And it is interesting because I feel like people stop drinking usually for one of two reasons. Either they're an addict, they have a physical dependency, they have what, I would now, as I've become more mature and understand these things, they have a disease, and they go to AA because they have a disease that they're constantly fighting off. And then some people, and this sounds like maybe you're more in this camp, you kind of just woke up one day and you're like, man, is alcohol really serving me? Like, is it really in service of pick whatever what your health, your body, your mental psyche. It sounds like you're maybe more in that camp, which I think is almost more noble, because like I could come to terms with the fact if I was an addict and I was like, I couldn't like have a drink without having the 20th drink. I think I could conceptualize that and get over and battle with alcoholism. But yeah. I'm not ready to step into the light where it's like, hey, there's some things I'm doing in my life, like eating Oreos and maybe having one too many cocktails with a cigar, and that's just not serving me. Like I'm not strong enough to get to that place yet. So not that I wish alcoholism on anybody, but I almost think that would be easier for me to deal with emotionally than be like, did I really need to have that second row of Oreos or that fifth cocktail with that third cigar? It's like, I haven't got to that evolved place that Trey is, where I can step away from things that aren't serving me.
Yeah, and you bring up a very good point. When I started making these changes in the interest of personal development, I felt enlightened, and I use that word very intentionally, because I felt like I've done this amazing thing in my life, and I want other people to experience it. And so as I tried to change people, I realized how difficult that is, and it's almost impossible. And you really can't ask somebody to change until they feel the necessity in their life. And so, yeah, when you're addicted, when you have to go to AA because you have a chemical dependency on a substance, yeah, that is one thing, and that is you know that you need help. But when you are just moving along in life, kind of trudging along, I guess, and you're not doing all the things that you ever really dreamt of accomplishing, it's not as easy of a conversation to have with yourself. Like I can. Either tonight I can go out to the bar and have, 4, 5, or 6 or 10 drinks with my friends, or I can sit down and study for a few hours and make progress toward my goal that I might not see realized for another 2 years. And that is so difficult to do, because if you're not seeing that progress right away, you're not getting that confirmation that you're doing something that is moving your life forward. And it's very difficult. And if you can't show somebody that, I don't know, you just have to live by example. That's what I've come to understand. If I'm going to help people demand the best for themselves, I need to do my best to exemplify all that I've gained from this experience.
Yeah. You know what I really enjoyed about catching up on a couple of episodes of your podcast is I have a good friend who you might actually know, John Vroman. He runs a group called Front Row Dads, and it's for fathers who are trying to be businessmen, not businessmen who are trying to be fathers. And he'd be a great guy to have on your podcast, because he's just a very generative guy. Like all of his conversations are positive. And we were at a live retreat and somebody said this, I can't remember who, and it was so good because he said, you know, today's breakthrough is tomorrow's ego trip. And sometimes when I've tuned in on podcasts like yours, I'm like, oh, here's somebody that just found whatever, you know, God, sobriety, enlightenment, running ultra marathons, and their breakthrough, they're just trying to force down everybody's throat because now they have this ego about it. And what I loved about listening to the episodes of your podcast in anticipation of this interview is you're really good at asking questions and trying to get to the root of other people's happiness versus like cramming your ideals down their throat. So first of all, I want to say thank you for having a good podcast where you're not just an egomaniac, because I think that's why most people do a podcast.
I appreciate that, and it's that I love and hate that word because I mean 5 or 6 years ago, I was driven by ego. I really was. I used to think I was the best at everything, even though I had absolutely no proof to back that up. I would go into every situation with this ridiculous amount of confidence, and it very rarely worked out for me. And so when I really started to make those transformations, I read a book by Ryan Holiday. It's called Ego is the Enemy. And just that book set me on such a wonderful path, especially down the road of Stoicism, which has become such a profound study for me. And realizing that, one, you don't have to suppress your ego. If you can learn to live alongside it and you can have a healthy relationship with it, then you can do really cool things. And then, you know, I guess after I read that book, I started asking myself consciously in my own mind, you know, is this what I'm about to say or what I'm about to do? Is it motivated by ego? And that question, it became such a daily practice. And when I said yes, I was able to make a decision based on that answer. And that I guess is what led me to wanting to know more about other people. Like I'm nobody. I'm in Columbus, Ohio. I work for myself. I've designed my lifestyle, which means a ton to me. But you know, you are doing amazing things. Other people I'm talking to are doing amazing things, and I'm no better than anybody else. And I really, really try to convey that message in the podcast.
Can you talk a little bit about that? Because, you know, I think Ryan Holiday is reintroducing a whole generation to Stoicism. And just through dumb luck, somebody gave me the, you know, Meditations of Marcus Aurelius, like in my 20s. And it was way over my head, but I at least knew what the concept was. Can you explain to people that are maybe hearing this for the first time, what is Stoicism and why is it kind of on the rise right now?
Yeah, absolutely. You're right. I mean, Ryan Holiday, I mean, he brands himself as a modern day Stoic, and I love his writing, and he's so good at what he does. You'll hear Tim Ferriss say that Stoicism is the operating system for life, which, you know, I don't know how tangible that is for some people. It's just really the realization that the only thing you have control of in your life is how you respond to situations. I mean, you can be driving down the road, and I know this is such a generic example, and somebody cuts you off and you can get pissed off, you can flick them off, I mean, you can get into a road rage fight, or you can realize that, hey, maybe they're having a bad day, maybe they're trying to get somewhere. What they're doing has absolutely no effect on my own life. They didn't hit me. They didn't cause an accident. I don't need to carry this anger with me for the rest of the day. And so I'm able to respond to that situation in a thoughtful and caring manner. And so that essentially is what Stoicism is. Like I said, I love Ryan Holiday's writing. I just bought his new book, Courage is the Way. I'm looking forward to reading it. I don't know. So I don't want to get too deep into it, but some of the things that he actually does on social media, it kind of contradicts what some of his writing is. But I mean, I love the message that he's actually conveying and spreading into the world, because it's very, very important. And I think if we can do more to instill that, we'd be less at each other's throats and more willing to help each other grow and lift each other up.
Yeah, I agree. What's ironic is that I know he's known as the modern day Stoic. The book of his that I actually like the most is Conspiracy, the story about Peter Thiel using Hulk Hogan as the vessel to sue Gawker out of existence. And like, absolutely, it's so funny that book just triggers both sides of my brain. On like the libertarian, I'm just like, yeah, no, a news organization that's just complete trash should have the right to exist. And then part of me is like, yeah, good for Peter Thiel for suing them out of existence. And then I'm like, but wait a minute, what does that say about free press and journalism? That's kind of scary. And then I'm like, yeah, but Hulk Hogan had his, like, my hero from my childhood had a sex tape released inappropriately, and Gawker should die. So even his book about current events is like, man, it really forces you to sit back and think about your your kind of opinions on things. So
Absolutely, man. And I read that book too, and I remember having mixed feelings myself. Before I knew any better, I was big into Gawker. I really enjoyed Valleywag when it existed. I think that's what it was called. Silicon Valley News and all of their publications. And I guess I didn't let myself realize how trashy they were. And so reading through that, and my personal opinion aside, I don't necessarily know that Peter Thiel's the best human in the world, but I see where his ferocity came from in wanting to sue Gawker out of existence. It was pulling at heartstrings in both directions, like you said, and so it was a very interesting case to read about.
Yeah, you mentioned that about not realizing how trashy it was. I kind of put a question out there to my limited audience, like my kind of focus group that's on Telegram. I have a Telegram thread, which is unfortunately just turned into a bunch of like libertarian memes. And it's like, that's not really what I originally wanted it to be. But I asked them, I said, hey, I'm going to be interviewing Trey. What are your questions for him on happiness? And the number one thing that came up from 3 different people was like, does Trey watch the news? Does he follow politics? And do the people that he meets that are genuinely happy, are they involved in news media consumption? Because if you are, my thesis is it's real hard to be happy the last, pick a number, 3 years, 3 months, 10 years, 20 years, 100 years. I don't know. If you're intimately involved and informed about politics and kind of current events, I think it's just getting harder and harder to be happy, even though, strictly speaking and statistically speaking, everybody's life is getting better, right? Like materialistically and theoretically, wealth of a nation, like everybody's getting better. But man, hard to be happy if you're watching the news. So that was one of the number one questions is, does Trey watch the news? Does he follow politics? Does the people that he interviews who are happy, how do they handle that noise?
So I knew coming to this podcast we were going to get into something like this, and I just want to say, like, all of my mindsets, it's an N equals 1. I do this, and I do my best to keep my opinions at if not to myself, at the very least, when I share them, I want to be open with them and not have a point to them. And so, do I watch the news? Yes, I do. I try to catch Lester Holt every evening. I like his new style. I enjoy watching his program. And I know how difficult it can be to watch news and not feel discouraged. He does some happy stories, but the vast majority, not in the past 2 years, the past 6 years, the past whatever it is. I mean, I'll be open and say what my viewpoints are, and I want to say what these are with all the love in the world, because I know not everybody, maybe nobody will agree with me, and that's completely fine, because if we can have nuanced conversations, if we can actually listen to each other, then we can understand where we're coming from. And so I personally was not super happy when Trump was elected, but I did my best to live my best life, because that's all I had the ability to do. And I'm not involved with politics. I have absolutely no desire to be involved with politics, but I do vote because I feel like that's the American way. And so I do. And so was I happy when Biden won? Yes. Do I think he's doing a great job? He's doing an okay job. I think there's a lot better to be done, but I have to, I don't know if disassociate's the right word, disconnect myself from the outside world, because the outside news cycle, I guess, because I don't have any control over it. Right. I want to be informed. I do, because not necessarily just in regard to conversation, but if I know what's going on in the world, then I can help influence some of my personal decisions. Climate change, I think, is an extremely important thing that we're living with in this day and age. And so if I can do my best to be as green as possible, fantastic. So I want to be informed about that. But in regard to actually separating myself from the news cycle, that is something that I've had to work on for a long, long time. And so the people I talk to who are living their happiest lives, I very rarely have conversations like this on the podcast. I just want to know what they're doing in their life to reach their highest level of excellence every single day. Because as entrepreneurs, as podcasters, as people who are demanding the best for themselves, they are always pushing themselves to be better and to do better. And so that's what I want to know. So, very rarely do I have, heated conversations or even conversations about, what people's political or personal viewpoints are, because that's theirs. And I want them to have that. And I don't want to try and change their mind, because we all know how futile that effort is. And
right.
Yeah, I want to know what people are doing every single day to live their very best lives.
That's awesome. And, a follow-up question to that, because this is kind of what I've felt, and whether you want to call it spirituality or religion or community or whatever the thing is, I do feel like Americans, we've gotten away from a sense of a higher purpose, whether that was going to church and believing in God, or whether that was being part of your local Kiwanis club or Boy Scout troop or whatever. There's a little bit of a sense of disconnect and disconnection from the community. Like, I don't really know anybody past my immediate neighbors in my neighborhood. And that's kind of embarrassing, where I feel like in generations past, it would have been like, you have a block party once in a while, and, the Smiths come over for dinner and all the kids play together and whatnot. And it worries me that we've substituted these things that we can control locally for kind of this dogma of larger political, whether it's social media, whether it's news, just kind of to your point, disconnecting from the stuff that we really can't control. We're really connected to that, but the stuff we can control, like, our own health, our relationships with our neighbors, maybe meeting your local sheriff to try to make the community a better place. People just don't do that shit anymore. And I can't figure out, I'm not smart enough to figure out, like, where was the switch where we disconnected from the local and the internal stuff that can make us happy, and we now project all of that, externally. I'm never going to meet Trump. Trump doesn't give a shit about me. I'm never going to meet Biden. Biden doesn't give a shit about me. But somehow we fixate on this stuff, and it's like, who might give a shit about me is my neighbor. If somebody's breaking into my house, I should probably go introduce myself to them, and we'll come up with a plan if somebody's breaking into somebody's house. But do you have any thoughts on either why that happened, or if you have no thoughts on that, why this makes us so unhappy?
That's a great question. I don't know. I'm again, like you're admitting to yourself, like I'm not smart enough to, have these answers. I think so many of the arguments will go back to social media, and I think that has a big role to play in it. But I think that happiness is probably predates that quite a ways. I hesitate to say this. Well, not this part. So I recently read the book, The Energy Formula by Sean Wells. He's a great guy. I had him on my podcast, and I'd probably be a great fit for your podcast as well. He's a biochemist. He's patented dozens of supplement ingredients. He's an extremely smart guy. And so energy is an acronym. I'm not going to be able to remember it all, but one of the why is for your tribe. And so the last part of the book was talking about building a tribe. And I had mixed feelings on that, because I like the idea of having a community. I like the idea of having people I can call on and, hang out and, have conversations with. But at the same time, I get so, the feeling of groupthink and the feeling of, this whole, let's grab our pitchforks and all run out down the road together so we can, lynch somebody, which I don't like using that word, but I mean, that's essentially what I'm envisioning here. That's scary to me. And so I go back and forth on whether or not I want to have a tribe or have a community or just have people I can openly have conversations with. And that's why these are so powerful for me. And so I don't know. I think it's important to have people within your network, your neighborhood, that you can actually just relate to and you can have a conversation with, especially if you don't necessarily agree with them. Because if we can actually have a nuanced conversation, if we can understand them a little bit better, then maybe, like you said, if your neighbor's house is getting broken into, you can say, hey, I respect Bert. I don't necessarily agree with Bert, but I'm sure as hell going to make sure that nobody steals his big screen TV, because he is somebody that I care about, regardless of our beliefs. And I want to make sure that he is taken care of, because I understand what it means for him to be happy. I understand what it means to alleviate some of his suffering. And I want to do my best to do that, not only for him, but for the people I talk with and the people around me. That's just, I don't know, that's just become, I guess that's become the bigger mission for me.
Yeah, I love that mission, and I'd love to get back to a point, and I think everybody's a little nostalgic for the way it used to be. You know, I don't want to sound like an old man. You can get off my grass, but I remember going on when I was a teenager, so this would have been in the 90s, not that long ago. I remember going on these backpacking trips with Boy Scouts, and we were in Southern California in Los Angeles. So a very mixed group. It's like we had some fathers that were super, super conservative, you know, supervising sheriffs at the county jail, ex-military. And then we had some fathers who were like, you know, in the 90s, they were probably hippies of the 60s and the 70s. You know, Jerry Brown and Nancy Pelosi are way too far right for them. They're just like as far left as you can get. And on backpacking trips, there's not shit to do except for sit around the campfire and talk. And so I remember teenage kids and adults and having these really aggressive, opinionated, pointed political discussions and arguments and debates. And then we were all friends and we broke down camp the next day and we walked 10 miles together and we set up camp together and we cooked together. And it was like a lot of people in that circle thought that the other fathers or kids were wrong, but they didn't think they were evil. And I get the feeling now that most people feel, well, no, it's not only that you're wrong, it's that you're wrong and that you're evil. And I had this conversation with a realtor the other day who were friendly enough to talk about politics and we were disagreeing on something. And I finally just stopped her and I was like, I won't use her name. I'll just say Mary. I said, hey, Mary, do you really think that I want to kill your kids and your grandma? Like you know my heart. We've done business together for a long time. We've broke bread together. We've met each other's families. Do you really believe that my opinions on the pandemic, do you really believe I want my children to kill your children and your grandma? And she's like, no, that's a good point. You know, I'm just a little heated. I'm like, yeah, come on, man. Like we can disagree on something without hating each other and vilifying each other. And that just seems to be the immediate go-to, like you said, grab the pitchfork, which is dangerous.
It is, man. And I think to your exact point, in the 90s, there was very little internet. There certainly were not cell phones with access to the internet. And so when you're sitting around the campfire, you have to look into somebody's eyes. And if you're going to argue with them, if you're going to make comments on their appearance or how smart or dumb you think they are, you are going to have that eye contact with them. And there may be a likelihood that they're going to jump up and punch you in the face. You don't have that on the internet. You can have people, spewing all kinds of bullshit, but you can just sign off as soon as you want to. And I mean, so maybe it is, partially, related to Facebook. I know Facebook's under a ton of fire right now, which I'm personally okay with, but I really I want to be able to have, even though we're, 1,000, I don't know how far away you are, 1,500 miles from me. I mean, we are still looking at each other's eyes and we are able to respect each other and have that mutual agreement that we want to produce something really cool here. We want to have a great conversation so other people can learn and grow from us. And that, I want more of that. I really, really do. And I don't know. I don't like engaging on social media for that very fact that you don't have that. It's just, I'm using this word a lot, but there's no nuance there. And I don't know, that's just not beneficial for me.
Yeah, and I've heard you say this several times on your podcast that whether it's eye to eye or just one-to-one conversation, that's what you really think society thrives on, which I agree with you. The snarky little comments, like I'm guilty of it as well. I've said some things on Facebook where I'm like, oh, would I really talk to a woman that way if we were in person? Right. Or if I knew that guy could just clock me in the face, would I really have said that to him, or vice versa? So I'm guilty of it. I don't claim to be a saint, but I've heard you mention this several times on your podcast about that one-to-one conversation, that eye to eye. What have you learned, several hundred conversations in now on your podcast? What have you learned about that power of having one-to-one conversations like humans are supposed to?
The first thing that pops into my mind is a mutual connection of ours, Nicole Jansen. You had her on your podcast recently. I was referred to her by a friend, Luke Dupron. He was a prior guest on the podcast, and I needed somebody because I didn't have somebody for the following week, and he referred me to Nicole, and it was a great conversation. I knew nothing about her though, and so when we started talking about religion and how religious she is, it was kind of an eye-opening moment for me. Like I grew up going to church like so many kids did in my 20s, and during college I became an atheist like so many kids do, and then now in my 30s I realize I'm too stupid to have any sort of clue what's actually out there, and so I try to be open to all ideas. And as I was having this conversation with Nicole and I was realizing how much God and Jesus mean to her, I was like, that's fantastic. I'm so glad that you have that in your life. And I never would have said that in my 20s. And my mind and my heart and my soul, if you want to call it that, are expanding to just be so, I guess, welcoming of other people's viewpoints and other people's beliefs and things that actually bring so much value and comfort in people's lives. And so I guess that is probably one of the most profound consequences that I was not expecting of actually having this podcast. Just being not open to new ideas necessarily, I mean that too, but being open to new beliefs and just kind of seeing what actually makes people tick and gives people the faith and the courage to move forward every single day, when this has been, for some, a really difficult 2 or 6 or however many years in our lives. And so knowing what actually drives them forward has been so profound for me.
That's awesome. And in the conversations, because I know you've been doing you do a weekly show, right?
I do, yeah.
Yeah, you've been doing a weekly show through the entire pandemic. Have you gotten some, tips or tactics or strategies or whatnot for people that are staying sane and happy during all this craziness? Whether it's because they're listening to the political craziness, or just because they're like, man, I'm sheltered in place in my home and I don't have my Friday night, cocktail hour to go to, or, for me, it was movies. Like, my only escape where I can turn everything off, turn off the cell phone, really have like just a release, is going to a movie. My team knows I would frequently ditch work on Thursday afternoon and go see a movie because I just needed that mental break. And when they shut down movie theaters in Los Angeles, I was like depressed for weeks. You should ask my wife. She's like, oh, I'm sorry that we can't do the same dinner date at Chipotle and go see a movie. I'm like, yeah, but it's not about the Chipotle and the dinner date. It's about not having to think about anything else for 2 or 3 hours. So I was crushed for like weeks. Anyway, that's my story. But have you talked to people who are like finding ways to have breakthroughs in happiness or maintain their happiness during all this craziness?
That's a very interesting question. And perhaps I've limited myself a little bit because I think the vast majority, if not everybody that I've spoken to over the last 2 years, I've noticed they've had a growth mindset. I mean, I don't think I've spoken with anybody who hasn't taken the last 2 years as an opportunity to grow their business or pivot their business or, take more time outside and just really grasp that freedom that they've been given. I spoke with I'm fortunate in the sense that there are a couple of publicists who send me authors to interview in the podcast, and one of them is Forrest Rivers, which is a pseudonym, and you'll hear why in a second. He has spent so much time outside in the Appalachian Mountains. I'm fairly certain he's hiked the AT Trail, at least part of it. And the amount of time he's been given to be outside during the pandemic has just absolutely changed his life. And he wrote a book about, I'm trying to remember exactly what it's called. It was something in direct relation to COVID-19 and how people can maintain a positive outlook and mindset during this time of difficulty. And so it was cool to see that. It's been cool to see how people have just seen the last couple of years as an opportunity. And I say that I've only spoken with those types of people that may be a detriment because I haven't given myself the opportunity to speak with people who have been struggling. And I think that's equally important because, we can't just write off the people who are not doing well right now, but the people who are having mental health issues or crises, or people who have been fired from their jobs, or people who are struggling with their work because they don't want to go in because they don't feel safe. And I'd like to talk to more of those people. And as I'm saying this, I realize that I need to go out of my way to find them. But I guess the key to answering your question is that everybody I've spoken with over the last 2 years, they've really harnessed their growth mindset and seen, or taken a step back and said, okay, here's how I can, improve my life during this period, this slowdown period. And they've really done so.
Yeah, it's interesting you mentioned the growth mindset, because I know plenty of quote unquote successful or wealthy people who actually don't have much of a growth mindset. And I know some people that, we as society would consider poor, for whether that means financially or opportunity wise or health wise, and they have a super growth mindset. So could you talk a little bit about what that even means to you and define like a growth mindset and maybe why that's so powerful with the group of people that you've talked to?
Yeah, that's a question I've not been asked before. So let me see if I can try to articulate this. I mean, when we talk about growth mindset, we compare that to a fixed mindset, where that's absolutely something that I used to be able to relate to. I mean, and it's such a real, still visceral feeling that I used to have, 6 or 7 years ago. I would go to my job, a sales job that I didn't even go to college for because I didn't study hard enough, and I'd go to a job that I absolutely hate, and so I would be there from 9 o'clock in the morning if I make it there in time to 5 o'clock at night, twiddling my thumbs and probably getting an hour's worth of work done. And then I'd come home and I'd be, I don't know if depressed is the right word, or just forlorn and not happy with my life. And so instead of actually trying to, improve myself by studying a new topic or computer science or, web design or anything like that, I would start drinking. I would go to the bar. I'd go to happy hour because that's just what you do. And I would go commiserate with other people who are not happy with their lives. And so it was this cyclical existence that I was living in. And because of that, I never felt like I had the opportunity, the courage, or even the will to improve. And I think about that, and I think about, trying to improve myself or trying to get a new job or trying to start my own business. And that feeling it was just washed away because I didn't think that I had the ability to do so. So that is where I come from a fixed mindset. Now, a growth mindset, for me, I've realized over the last few years that I'm so capable of changing. I'm so capable of improving myself. And I want to be careful not to make it sound like I'm coming from a place of ego. This is coming from a place of experience. Like I taught myself web design. I started a business in web design. I realized that I'm able to learn still. Like, I'm not in school. I'm many years removed from high school and college, and I still have the ability to learn. I still have the ability to read. I moved my laptop so you can see my new bookshelf. I'm proud of the books that I have because I do my best to read every single day, and that's just been such an opportunity for me to learn and grow. And so one thing that I've been able to do is just really optimize every area of my life. And I'm still discovering new areas in which I can change and improve, just because we have conventional wisdom about how we operate with our money. And I know one of our first conversations was about money and how we can manage it and how we can put it to work for us instead of, just having a savings account and 401k. We can do a lot more with it and invest in it. And so that's been really cool to, I don't like using this term, but hack my money, hack my time, hack every element of my existence so I can get the most out of it. And so that's, to me, that is what a growth mindset is. I'm sure that's different for other people, but for me, it's just knowing that I don't have to be stuck in one place. I have the option and the ability to design my life in a way that actually suits me.
So I'm really interested in that shift, right? Kind of that Batman origin story. And, Joe Rogan, who I do listen to his podcast, always, I think it's a Hemingway quote where like most men live quiet lives of desperation or something to that effect. I'm butchering the quote, but it's like silent lives of desperation. And I think the danger is a lot of people who get into that fixed mindset and they don't think they can improve. They just stay at that job forever and they go to the happy hour forever. And then, they turn around at 50 or 60 and they're like, oh yeah, I'm 80 pounds overweight. And I didn't really get after it at any level. So, where was the switch? Like, was that the deciding not to drink? Did that come later? Like, what was the catalyst to be, wait a minute, I'm going to end up at this job till I'm 55 and put a bullet through my head. And I don't say that lightly because I know some men genuinely consider that as an out. But what was the shift from like, I'm in this fixed mindset, I'm in this job I hate, I'm drinking too much, to like, nope, I'm going to crush it and be like the new and improved Trey Kauffman?
Yeah. It was, I don't say this in jest. It was podcasts. My last real job, I was a marketing manager at a dental office. And so my morning commute was 25 minutes and, the same home. And so I used to spend close to an hour of my day listening to, I used to listen to radio a lot, and I came from a radio background, so I don't want to shit on it too much, but I was listening to jocks make stupid jokes every single morning and every single afternoon. And when I started listening to podcasts, I realized that wasn't serving me. And I don't remember what the first podcasts I listened to were. I know Tim Ferriss was a big one. I listen to Joe Rogan when I can. One guy that's he's not as well known, but Kevin Rose. He's been an influence on my life since I was a kid, actually, when he was on Tech TV and then G4. So I listen to his podcast a lot too. And so when I started realizing that there are other people, I knew other people were living their best lives, but when they were sharing information because they actually wanted to help other people improve, that's when I really started to question, the decisions I was making. And so I to kind of truncate a long story, I started listening to podcasts, and I discovered, or I gained a stronger understanding of what meditation was. So I started experimenting with that. And I started experimenting with mindset. I would wake up every morning. I would listen to an inspirational audio track on Spotify just to kind of get pumped up in the morning and get a good feel for my life. And then I started reading, more self-improvement books. And it was just it was this very, very slow snowball effect that eventually started to accumulate on top of each other. And I realized that, okay, there are other people who are having these huge successes. And I used to think that everything was done overnight. But when I realized that I wasn't going to wake up one morning and I was going to be a podcaster, or I was going to be an author with all this sudden success, like I actually had to do the work. It sounds so stupid saying it out loud, but I think some people need to say it to themselves, like, nothing for me was going to happen overnight. I need to bust my ass to get these things that I actually want. When I had that realization, that's when I started to actually focus on self-improvement and self-development. And it all started with a podcast. That's really what got me into a place where I've actually been comfortable and happy with my life.
It's funny you mentioned that, because a lot of times friends of mine will be like, well, you still work in the mortgage industry. You're doing 40, 50 hours a week at your job. How do you find time to, consume so much information and whatever, listen to books, listen to podcasts, do the podcast? And I'm like, well, it's easy. I just stopped listening to Led Zeppelin's Stairway to Heaven for the 5,000th time, right? Because to your point, there's so much time that we waste just like putting on noise and distraction and shitty Netflix, episodes and listening to House of the Holy or Led Zeppelin 3 over and over and over again. Yeah. It's like, all right, I kind of know the lyrics. Like I kind of know the riffs. Like I'm not going to be a musician. I can stop listening to the same radio jocks over and over. I can't imagine how much time I wasted listening to Kevin and Bean. They're the big, rock radio station here in Southern California. Yeah. And it's like, I get it. I know their personalities. They don't know me. I don't know them. We don't care about each other. Why am I so invested in this morning radio show? And I think it's great, because I kind of the same thing here is like, I was kind of humming along in the mortgage business. I'm like, no, I think I could do more. And I think podcasts were a big part of that. Now that you've been doing your podcast, like, I'd be interested in hearing about some of either your favorite guests or favorite lessons. Like obviously growth mindset is one of them, but what's some stuff that you've come across where you're like, oh yeah, this is the reason I'm doing this show. This is kind of the golden nugget that I got as a takeaway. Yeah.
Great question. At some point, so I released episode 115 this week, and I'm pretty sure it's 2 years this month that I started the podcast. So it's definitely, you get to a point where some of the conversations you have, they're unique, but they are also kind of reconfirming things that you've already talked about. And so you try to frame them in a little bit different of a sense. And so when I have the opportunity to speak with somebody who, is going to give just a new approach on something that we haven't talked about, that is really where my fire gets lit. And that's been so exciting for me. And so the first one who comes to mind is Christina Wise. She is an incredible woman out of Austin. Actually, her and her daughter run a company called Wealthy. And so I took her personal finance program. It's called Curbs, which is just transformed the way I approach my money, as we were talking about earlier. And I'm taking her business course starting in a couple weeks. And so I was actually hesitant to talk about money on the podcast. I really was, because there's the old maxim, money doesn't buy happiness. But then, as simple as it sounds, well, neither does being poor. And so if you can use your money in a way that actually feels good to you, instead of just buying a bunch of shit off Amazon, but if it actually adds value to your life, and that's a great thing. And so having that conversation really allowed me to think differently about the way I handle my money, especially as I'm starting to make more of it. And so that was very profound. And so with that, that was a great conversation. More recently, I had a woman on my podcast. She's an author. She's got her first book coming out with a major publisher. I can't remember which one, in January. Her name is Carolina. I'm going to butcher her last name, like Żakowski or something like that. I don't remember, Polish or something. But so we talk about Jesse Harless and how he had to quit drinking. Like that was court mandated. Carolina, like me, she decided that drinking was not serving her. And so she has a program called Alcohol AF, which you may think as fuck, but it's actually alcohol free or euphoric AF. And so she has written a book on how people can live their best lives alcohol free. And it was a really, really cool conversation because it was just, I don't know. I don't have the chance to talk with a lot of people who have decided that that's not serving them. And when I get the chance to, I don't want to call it confirmation bias because that's not what I'm looking for. I'm not trying to change people's minds on, what they're doing with their time. But when I'm able to actually have a really good, enlightening conversation because she's done a lot of research into that whole industry, it was nice to be able to, back up some of my beliefs and some of my experiences with things that she's actually learned in writing this book.
That's nice. And you mentioned the things that aren't serving you, and spoiler alert, Christina Weiss, awesome lady. Love her to death. She came from the real estate and mortgage industry. So we've talked a bunch of times and I need to find a way to work in her money class next year because I'm really good at making money. I'm kind of bad at saving it and investing it. So I need Christina's.
It's a great class.
I need Christina's class. Shout out to Wealthy. But when you mentioned the drinking thing not serving you and, it's something, just a choice and a lot of people get fixated on the evils and the vices. But what are some other things that you've discovered on this journey that either aren't serving you well or are serving you well? Before we went live on the podcast, I was guessing that you're kind of into the minimalist movement, which you're like, yeah, you pegged that right. And I know you really like the outdoors, but what are some things that you've found through this journey and these interviews that's like, hey, these are really the things that aren't serving me and that might only apply to Trey, but that might apply to a much larger cross-section of Americans. What are some things that aren't serving me? And what are some things that I've discovered are really serving me and I need more of in my life?
Yeah, man. All right, I'm going to say something that is not going to be, it's going to be a widely unpopular opinion, but it's, again, N=1. It's just me. The last 2 years, I've realized how little I need to go out. And I say go out, I go outside. Being outside is very important to me. I run, I bike, I rock climb. That's extremely important to me. But when I say go out, like, I don't think I've been in a restaurant more than, 5 times in the past 2 years. And, initially, obviously because of COVID, but now that restaurants are open, I'm realizing, one, I don't need to spend money in restaurants. That does not serve my financial goals. And two, I've come to make every single meal that I eat. And that's been very, very important to my health and wellness journey. I know exactly what's in the food. I eat 98% whole foods and I throw some breads in because I make sandwiches. And so the understanding why I decided that I don't necessarily need restaurants in my life. And I've got nothing against restaurants, only all the love in the world. I know they've been struggling. I hope they continue to do well. I know this is not going to convince people to not go out to eat, but for me, that just was not serving my health and my financial goals. And so I cut it out. Like I said, I have not been in a restaurant more than 5 times in the past 2 years. And that number will probably continue to dwindle. And it's because health has been so incredibly important to me. I think really that is the biggest thing that I've discovered about myself over the last 2 years, that what I need to do is stay fit, stay healthy. And because I love this life and I want to live it as long as I possibly can. And health is just, that's the way to do it. And so that is probably the single biggest thing that I realized was not serving me. I'm trying to think of another example. I know you love movies so much, and it pains me to hear you say that you've not been able to go to them. But what's been interesting to me is to see the evolution of movies kind of evolve into the home theater system. And so I was never a huge movie goer, but I think now that's probably outside my purview now, because I realized how much I like staying home and enjoying film that way. But I don't know. I think it's really the restaurant and the alcohol thing that I cut out of my life because it wasn't serving me.
Yeah, have a couple kids that won't be quiet and a wife that asks questions during the entire movie when you watch it at home, and you'll change your mind. Because like at least at the theater when it gets dark and there's other people, like my kids and my wife, they know they're supposed to be quiet. If we're in the sanctuary of our home, I can't get through 15 minutes of a movie without my wife or my kids being like, hey, what's happening? Who's that? And I'm like, honey, you've seen the same fucking movie that I have. Like we have the same 15 minutes of knowledge. There's no way I know what that character is going to do better than you know what that character is. I promise you, I didn't watch the movie last night when you were asleep just to rewatch it with you today. She's like, okay, yeah, that's fair. But what do you think he's going to do? And I'm like, honey, I love you to death. The one thing I hate doing is watching movies with you.
Does she do that? Does she do that in the theater too?
She used to. So when we first started dating and, you know, we got past the couple fancy dates where I was trying to woo her. And now I was like, all right, it's time for me to slide you into my comfort zone. Like we're going to do Chipotle and AMC theaters. So we go to a movie and the movie started and she's like, hey, what's this about? And I'm like, oh, you know, it's an action movie. We'll figure it out together. And then like about 7 minutes in, she had asked her a third question. I'm like, look, this might be a deal breaker in our relationship. This is not how I do movies. Let's talk about it after the credits roll. And I mean, you would have just think like I slapped her dog or something because she was like, oh, okay, I guess he really takes these movie things seriously because I can't stand people that talk in the theater. So that was one thing we had to adjust to, or sadly, my wife had to do most of the adjusting in our relationship. She had to adjust to when we first started dating. It's like, you just don't ask questions during movies. So, question for you. You know, there's been a lot of stress with people working from, you know, I kind of want to merge a couple questions here. I'm fascinated in the minimalist movement because, you know, I came from a family that worked really hard and was probably lower middle class. So buying a bunch of shoes or having a bunch of crap, like in some ways that satisfies that itch of me telling myself that like I made it, you know? So I'm fascinated in the minimalist view. And then I think, you know, couple that with everybody staying at home and just being easy to buy shit on Amazon and renovate for the sake of renovating and whatnot. Can you talk a little bit about maybe that minimalist movement and how that relates to happiness? And, you know, we've got a lot of people for the first time ever working from home, educating their kids from home. Like the home has become so much more important in the last 2 years versus, I can kind of distract myself, to your point, going out to a restaurant, going out to a bar, going out to a movie. Do you have any thoughts in the home life for either single people or couples of like, minimalism and designing your space and being happy in your area? Because I know a lot of people that are on their last leg with, you know, working from their kitchen table and having their kids have to, you know, be in school and Zoom, or they're just home alone and they like don't feel comfortable in their space anymore. I don't even know what question I'm asking, but I'm just wondering if you have any thoughts on like space, environment, home, minimalism. Go wherever you want with that question.
Yeah, that's a great question. And I mean, going back to the point about movies, I don't put judgment on this. I guess I will say that I'm lucky in the sense for me that I don't have kids, and so I don't have those distractions. But I mean, sometimes it takes a conversation like this for me to realize like, you know, I'm fortunate for, and I don't have somebody distracting me from my work every single day. So I understand how that can be different and frustrating, and at times, you know, putting us on our last leg every single day because we are trying to educate and try to work and all the same. I respect those people. That's just I don't have that distraction in my life. Now, I also want to say in regard to minimalism, there are people who are hardcore minimalists out there, and that's not me. So I don't want to say something to offend those people. But for me, you know, one of the biggest things when it comes to, you know, actually making purchases, I want to make sure that what I'm buying is actually going to serve me in some way and actually going to bring value to my life. And so I don't know. I try to practice the practice of, if I'm going to buy something and it's a fairly significant purchase, I'm going to think about it for a little bit of time, you know, a week or two. I'm going to put it in my cart, let it sit there, see if I get a retargeted ad and I get a coupon from whatever website I'm buying it from. And I want to make sure that it's something that I'm thinking about every single day, like naturally. Like I'm not going to keep it in my line of sight, but if it's something that keeps coming in mind and I realize that, okay, this is something that I actually want, it's going to add value to my life, then I will let myself have it. some things that I always let myself have are books. That I do my best to expand my worldview through those. And so, when I go to the bookstore, I'm stealing this quote from Ryan Holiday. I will never let finances get in the way of a book that I want to read. That's important to me. And they are fairly, they're not super expensive, especially if you go to half price books or something like that. And so I want to make sure that that's something that I continue to invest in, at least for myself. Most recently, for example, I've been wanting to kind of get back into strength training. And so I've been following, maybe you've heard of this company before, Banff Hammer. It's a big ass hammer. Like it's a hammer. They have got like 10, 20 pound and 40 pound weights. And so I bought a 40 pound hammer that's not here yet, but it's something I've been wanting for a long time. And so you basically do all these, mobility exercises to help you build your strength. And it's something that I've been thinking about doing for a long time, and finally pulled the trigger on it because I was getting back into strength training and actually, making sure that I remain in shape. So, big purchases like that, I do my best to not do on a whim, because I don't want to have that buyer's remorse. And I mean, now with all the supply chain issues, I think we have a lot more of an opportunity. I hope we have a lot more of an opportunity going into the holidays to think about what we're actually buying. I hate Black Friday. I think Black Friday is a bit the bane of the holiday season. I've worked at Best Buy on Black Friday in the past, and it was just a nightmare. I don't know. I just want people to be more cognizant of what they're buying in their lives, and I don't want it. I don't know. Again, I just want people to. I don't know. I want it to serve value. I want it to scratch an itch instead of, just hitting that dopamine center in your brain and saying, hey, I bought something. This feels good for 5 minutes. And, oh, now I just spent $200 and I really don't care about this gadget or whatever it is. So I don't know. For me, that's an exercise that I try to do every time I try to purchase something. So when it comes to minimalism, that is my minimalism. I'm always trying to get rid of crap that I don't use anymore. And so I guess, speaking of Christina Wise, she made me realize that I really love having a simple life. And a lot of that is not having too many distractions.
Yeah, I love that. And, you mentioned meditation and mindfulness earlier. One of the things that has forced me to be mindful is having kids, because it's funny how much judgment you put on kids because of their lack of understanding. And then you're like, wait, I do the same thing. So, when you talk about purchasing stuff that adds value versus scratch an itch, we'll be walking through the store and I can tell when we're at Target, when the kids are just like, I want that. Can I have that toy? Can I have that toy? And you can realize when it's that versus like, oh, this look of wonderment of like, Daddy, could we put together that Lego toy? And it's like, all right, well, now I'll spend the $30 on that, but I won't buy the $5 tchotchke. And what's funny is as I'm walking through the store with them and I'm like, these stupid kids, like they just want to grab everything off the shelf and whatnot. Then I start to reflect on myself and I'm like, wait a minute, that's exactly what I used to do with shoes or DVDs or pick whatever the thing is, or cars that I've wasted an insane amount of money on. You spend the money, you get that little 5-minute dopamine shot. And then you're like, well, now I need those shoes in a different color to get the dopamine shot again. And then I need to buy that. And then I gotta trade it in to get a nicer car. And it's like having kids is like the thing that has made me because I've tried meditation. I've tried the mindfulness exercises. I know this lady, Juliana Ray, who's an awesome mindfulness coach. I've tried it all and I can't get into that rhythm of meditation. But being with my kids, you have to be super mindful of everything. Yes. And it's been a great reflection. So I recommend you knock a few of them out one day, or adopt a couple or whatever. Let's talk a little bit about your, we'll quote day-to-day normal job. What do you, I'm guessing, I could be wrong here. I'm guessing the podcast doesn't serve your full financial needs. So I'm guessing you have a quote unquote regular job. What does Trey do in his normal life?
Wouldn't that be the dream, man? Like, I don't know what your podcast does for you as well, but I mean, it would be so cool to be able to at least be part-time with this. Well, I guess I'm more than part-time, but actually making some money from it. So no, that is certainly more of a passion project. And it's, I mean, even if it never brings money, I still get tremendous value out of it. There are, of course, times where I question, do I really want to do this? And then I have a great conversation and I'm like, yeah, I do. So the day-to-day job, I'm a solopreneur. I build websites. That is my one-line pitch, but it kind of goes deeper than that. I also host, maintain, manage, and then there are still a couple select few clients that I'll do some marketing work for. I'm big I shouldn't put emphasis on that. I try to be involved with the running community here in Columbus, and so I work with the Columbus 10K. I do all of their marketing and advertising to help grow the event, which has just been so much fun to kind of see it grow into. I don't know. I love being around people who are just continually pushing themselves. I mean, I'm never going to be an elite athlete. Never, as much as I want to. I've finished second in a local 5K one time. That's like the highlight of my career.
Nice.
Yeah, but yeah. So I mean, the web design thing. That's been awesome for me because it allows me to make a living working for myself, and it's got an unlimited potential to grow and learn. Right now I primarily work in WordPress, but I'm actually studying to become a full stack developer. I would love to move into the SaaS space. There's a couple opportunities that I want to develop for, so just learning and kind of broadening my scope and my horizon has just, again, it scratches that itch going back, 5 years. I'm realizing that I'm still able to learn. I'm still able to do things that I didn't think were possible. And so that gives me that fulfillment that I never had working for somebody else.
I work in the finance world, and I'm technically an employee of another company, but I'm effectively self-employed, fully commissioned. Yeah. And I can't imagine working any other way. If somebody offered me a giant salary and was like, but you got to put on a suit and tie and you got to be there 8:45 and clock in and work till 5:30 every day, I think I would rather kill myself.
Absolutely.
And so was there kind of a dovetailing of you finding happiness going on this journey and becoming a solopreneur? Like when you left the 9-to-5 world, was that scary? Was there some depression, some fear, or did that kind of dovetail nicely with this journey into like Trey being a more happy, fulfilled person? Because I can't think of anything more scary than being a solopreneur, and also nothing more satisfying and uplifting than being a solopreneur, because then you're kind of in control of your own world. And I love that idea. So did those coincide, or did one come before the other?
Maybe there's something wrong with my brain, but I don't have a large aversion to risk. And so I again, maybe it's because I don't have the dependence, but I was not scared of going off my own and really building this for myself. I had enough savings that if I fell flat on my face, then I'd be okay for a little while. Now, with that, there was, as I was starting, I did want to make some supplemental income. And so going to your point of, even no matter what the salary is or, what they're offering you, I would rather, fail on my own than, make $500,000 with another company. So I did want to supplement my income and at least a little bit as I was growing. And so I decided to work for the city of Columbus in the parks department. And I went out on my first day. I thought it'd be really cool just to be outside all day, cutting lawns, whacking weeds. I quit after the first day, and I'm not super proud of that. But I realized how I don't know. I didn't feel like I was with my tribe, if you want to call it that. I didn't feel like I was doing something that was fulfilling to me. I didn't feel like my time was being used wisely. And so the fear of actually going out on my own, it didn't really exist. And so I was lucky. I worked hard. I made sure that I was okay moving forward, just to hustle and grind as much as I had to build the book of business that I needed to be successful.
And are you happy where you're at? Or, because I think the curse of the entrepreneur is like, yeah, I've got 7 clients. I can afford my place. I've got a great life, but I could have 17, or I could have 70, or I could scale this giant company and have 700. It's like, it's this really scary thing where for entrepreneurs, the answer is really always more. I could be doing more loans. I could be recording more podcasts. I could be coaching more clients. I could be making more money. I could hire more people. And it's like, and then at some point you got to look around and be like, dude, my life's pretty awesome. Like, I'm paying all my bills. I got good time with my family. I do jujitsu 5 times a week. But man, the curse is like, as an entrepreneur, you could always do more. You could always be more successful. You could have a bigger house. You could make more money. So are you happy where you're at? Yes. Or is there a certain amount of growth that you're still seeking?
I think that is a message I try my best to articulate and convey, is that you can be happy and still have goals that push beyond where you are right now. And I still don't think that's the best way of putting it, but I am very, very happy where I am right now. I'm happy with what I have in my life. I'm happy with what I don't have in my life. And I think that growth mentality, I think I know it can serve you or it can hinder you. And I try not to be, I try not to catch myself on the hedonic treadmill. Like I don't want to say I'll be happy when I have this, because I've been that person before. And so I guess I look at my development, I look at where I'm going and where I've been and where I'm at right now. And I say, that will do great for my future goals. It's not motivated by money, which I think may be the case for some of the examples you just listed, but maybe not. It's motivated because I want to continue learning, and here's what I want to do with my time. From a web design standpoint, where I'm right now, like I love working for myself. I love having control of my day. That's super important to me. When somebody asks what I do, I like to say in jest, whatever the fuck I want, whenever the fuck I want to. And that's I say it in jest, but I mean, it's true to me. And so, if I grow into a position where I can actually develop some software and have some SaaS services, it'd be really cool to, build a company and then sell it, because one thing that I always loved, I told you I used to really follow Valleywag because I've always been fascinated by Silicon Valley. That's just always something that's it's stuck in my head. Like, that'd be really cool to, be the next Uber of something. And so there is still some of that desire there, but I want to do it in a way that is meaningful for me, and in a way that I can live within integrity doing it. And so that's just something I'm exploring to see if it actually feels good. If it doesn't, then I'll give it up. I've got no problem in saying, hey, this was a learning lesson, not a failure. I don't like that word. A failure it's a reason to learn. And so I'm going to move on from what I learned and then continue in my development and continue running a business that, my clients seem to really respect.
Yeah. And you said something there that I think some of our listeners will be familiar with. Some of them will not. The hedonic treadmill. Can you explain a little bit what that is and a little bit about that trap? Because that's one of my favorite theories that I'm kind of coming to grips with in my 40s, that I've been on that treadmill for 20 years. So can you explain a little bit about that?
I mean, yeah, it's I don't have a understanding of it beyond, essentially what I just said, but I used to say this verbatim. Like I remember a conversation I was having with somebody over coffee. Like, I will be happy when I start my own business, or I will be happy when I make this much money. It's that lifestyle creep. Like, you accomplish one big goal, but then you set your sights, way out down into the distance, and you'll say you're basically kicking the can down the line. You're saying, okay, I'll be happy here, but oh wait, that was just lying to myself, or I was just kidding. I'll be happy down here. And that's, for me, it's that creep, that always wanting more and never being content. I think content is a big word. It's something that can scare a lot of people away, because content is part of happiness. It's being comfortable with where you are sitting right now. Like, am I content with what I have? Yes, that answer is yes. And if it's, I don't know, I don't want to speak for other people, but if it's no, then, start to think about what your priorities are. And so in regard to the treadmill, like I can never say I will be happy when I have this, because that is that's a curse for me. And I know that we don't always have as much time as we think we have.
Yeah. I've been having this conversation a lot with our coaching clients, because, it's been a wonderful 2 years for mortgage professionals with rates low and housing still going great. And, I'm talking to some of my coaching clients who, for the first time in their life, they've made $500,000, $700,000. A couple of them made $1 million. And they're like, yeah, but I'll just be happy when I get this much money in the bank. And I'm like, hey, I have fallen into this trap too, guys and gals. If you could go back in time 10 years, and, you 10 years ago was right here listening to you complain about only making $1 million, you would kick your own ass. Like, it's embarrassing. So go hire, if you're at that level, go hire a $50,000 a year assistant, admin, nanny, house cleaner, whatever, to make your life better. Because like, if you're making $1 million a year and you're already looking at like, well, where's the next level I got to get to before I can be happy? I mean, that's a really dangerous trap that you'll probably never get out of.
Now, going back to Christina Wise, I want to give her credit for this. I was on her podcast, and she made me realize that when I used to say that of myself, she said, well, were you not happy at that time? Like, if somebody says I'll be happy when I have $10 million, ask them, are you not happy right now? Like, are you sad? Are you miserable? Are you not feeling good with your life? Because I would have to assume that answer is, well, no, I actually am happy, but maybe I'll be happier. And then they start to think about they start to be critical with what they're saying of themselves. And hopefully they can feel like there is power in what I'm doing right now and actually have the ability to be happy, but still want to pursue other goals, because I think you can distinguish between the two.
I love it. I love it. And, I always like to close with a couple questions, obviously, because of the challenges we've been dealing with the last couple years. And the last question I'll ask you is, what's the question I forgot to ask? So I'll let that ruminate in your subconscious for a minute. But, I love the fact that you've kind of discovered over this last 18 months or so that one of the things that's not serving you is going out, eating out, things of that nature. When the world gets back to normal, whatever that means, what are you most looking forward to as far as, connecting with other people or reestablishing your tribe, or what's the thing you're kind of looking most forward to? And this can either be coming out of the pandemic or just in the future, or, the positive direction of the nation or whatnot. What are you most looking forward to coming up in the next 12, 18, 24 months?
Yeah, I've never really been much of a traveler, probably because I never made a lot of money. Now that I do, I've started thinking more of it. And then, of course, travel restrictions have been in place. I would love to travel across the ocean. I would love to go to Bali. I'd love to go to Thailand. That'd be really cool. That'd be something that I would love to experience. But I think more than that, I've had 115 of these conversations. There are so many people right here in the United States that I really want to meet. And so, you talk about Sarah Elkins and her No Longer Virtual conference. Like, I don't tell her this, but I'm considering signing up and going in next March, because it'd be really cool just to meet these people who have been inspiring me. And so I want to meet people like yourself. I want to actually shake your hand. I want to say, hey, let's just have a great conversation in person, because I think there's a lot of value there. So yeah, I would like to do more traveling, but more specifically, I would like to actually meet some of these people that I'm having conversations with.
Yeah, man. Maybe we should just design our own conference, like just 100 cool people.
That'd be awesome.
No keynote speakers, no anything. We're just going to get in a big 100-person circle and do some.
Just call it
kumbaya.
that.
Yeah, just call it that. Just call it. We'll call it what?
100 cool people.
100coolpeople.com.
I love it, dude. I love it.
There you go. 100 cool people in a room, drum circles, no keynote, no agenda. Perfect. Just be like 3 days of just talking to cool people. Yes. I like that idea. And then, of course, you've got a lot going on personally, professionally, the passion project of the podcast. What's the question I forgot to ask, or what's the thing that you're like, man, I really wish when I get interviewed that I got asked this question, or there's this question I've been really meaning to ask other people that I just never get to. Like, what's the question I forgot to ask during the podcast?
I love that quote. I love that closing question. I do my best to ask, something similar at the end of my podcast, and I'm going to turn it around, because it's more of I can't think of anything else. So the question is, I want people to ask this of themselves: how can I demand the best for myself? And it's trying to think critically about what you have in your life and what you can do better. And so I know that's completely subverting your question, but I really want people to ask that of themselves. What can I do better in my own life? I don't know. I'm not trying to cop out, but that's the first thing that comes to my mind.
It's so great, because there's that quote, right? The change we want to see in the world starts within ourselves. Yes. Or I butcher quotes all the time, but something along those lines. It's so true, for the person that maybe does listen to my podcast, and myself included, who gets real riled up about stuff that's way out of our control. What we can control is like what's going on in ourselves, the conversations we have, the way that we pour into our kids and our fellow man, and getting to know my neighbor just in case his house gets robbed. That's the stuff we can really have control over. So I love that. Like, what's the best that you can do within yourself, man? So that's the way to end the podcast. And I appreciate you being on, Trey.
Yeah, man. Thank you so much for this opportunity. I like I said, I've been looking forward to having this conversation for, I don't know, I know we had to reschedule. So it's been months since I've been looking forward to this. So I appreciate the space that you're creating. I appreciate you just having, again, nuanced conversation with me. And I look forward to the 100 Cool People conference in 2022 or 23, something like that.
Perfect, man. We'll talk soon.
All right, man. Sounds good. Thank you.
All right. Talk soon. Bye.